On the CANSA Couch with Megan and Kudzai.
Welcome to On the CANSA Couch, where we unpack the conversations that matter to your health. Today's topic may surprise you. Most South Africans know that smoking causes cancer. But far fewer of us know that alcohol also plays a role in increasing our risk of developing cancer. And not only a little bit, it is actually now being shown and classified that alcohol is what we call a group 1 carcinogen, meaning that there is very strong scientific evidence that it causes cancer in humans. And at this level, it means that there's been lots of research done and they've got similar types of results to be able to make the statement. Yet drinking, as we know, is part of many of our celebrations. It's a very accepted, basically alcohol at a celebration. Also at sporting events and even at social gatherings. So today we're asking, what does the science actually tell us?
Joining us today is someone who has spent years researching public health and alcohol policy. Professor Susan Goldstein is the Managing Director of Priceless SA at the SAMRC BITS Center for Health Economics and Decision Science, and she serves on the board of the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance. Professor Goldstein, welcome to On the CANSA Couch.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'm going to jump away with some really pertinent questions, if I may, Prof. And I agree with Kudzai. Thank you so much for joining us. I listened to a podcast the other day and all about alcohol, and I learned so much. So I think this is going to be something where people are going to sit up and say, we never knew it. And I think, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with the biggest misconception. And many people are shocked to hear this, that alcohol has been classified as a group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, or AR, as we often refer to it, and which is a specialized cancer research agency of the World Health Organization. So may I ask you, what exactly does it mean, and why do so few people know that alcohol increases the risk of cancer?
Thank you very much. That's a fantastic question. You know, I don't know exactly the answer because I don't know why people don't know. You know that this was declared an IARC level 1 cancer determinant in 1988.
Wow.
That's nearly 40 years ago. And we've done nothing as a world community to deal with it. So that's I don't know why we haven't done it, but I've got some suspicions and I'll share them with you a bit later. What it means, and it's classified in a similar way to tobacco that people know very well. What it means is that there's very strong evidence. They're almost 100% sure that this causes cancer. And not only that, it causes a number of different kinds of cancer. It's not just one kind of cancer. So the most common cancers, or among the most common cancers in South Africa, breast cancer and prostate cancer, it's associated with. Also larynx, colon, esophageal cancer, and those are just a few of the cancers that alcohol causes. So it's really quite shocking in many ways that we as a society just ignore it.
And can I ask you, with that being said, is it more that people are considering this to be, you know what, if you're a heavy drinker, you know, like, for example, on the weekend, a person might say they have a bottle of wine over the weekend. Is that okay? Or is it only heavy drinkers that should be concerned?
Well, there are two different answers to that. The one is that the World Health Organization said in 2023, said that there is no safe level of drinking alcohol. And that does relate to the cancers. In relation to some of the other harms from alcohol, so for example, the heart disease, the hypertension, all the things, road accidents and so on, that does relate to how much you drink. So if you drink moderately, you may not get those harms. But in relation to cancer, it's not how much you drink. It's never safe.
So we basically say we need to look at teetotaling, am I right?
We are. I think that's a bit unrealistic at this point. I mean, a lot of people, there are, I struggle to say this, but there are some benefits to alcohol. I mean, it's a legal drug, if you like, that helps people relax to a certain extent. So in very light amounts, it's not harmful. But I think what we need at this point is better control over drinking. I think one of the facts that people do not know about South Africa is that only 30% of people in South Africa do drink. So that means 69 to 70% of South Africans don't drink at all. Yeah, it's a fascinating statistic. And yet we see adverts, we see everything that tells us drinking is part of our life. It's so important. And clearly it can't be, because if so many people are not drinking, they're perfectly fine without it.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, Prof. Goldstein, that you say this has been 40 years research being done on this knowledge that alcohol is a carcinogen. I'm surprised because in reverse, when you look at smoking, you see on the packs of the of cigarettes, they have this, the warnings about, smoking is harmful to your health and might cause cancer. We know all this in society, but I'm surprised that 40 years in the making, and we haven't had any kind of warning, for example, compared to the cigarettes related to alcohol and it being a carcinogen. That's really exciting. That's really interesting. Sorry. Would you like to say something about that, Prof. Goldstein?
Yeah, that's an important point. But did you know that when tobacco was first discovered to be a carcinogen, it was 1950s. So it took almost 40 years for all the tobacco regulation to come through. And in fact, part of the reason that these things take so long to get integrated into society is because these are products of profit-making industries. So if you recall, I don't know if you recall, there was a lot of court cases in the United States suing tobacco companies for interfering with policy. And it was much later that we were able at a global level to start trying to control tobacco. So in terms of alcohol, the alcohol industry is so powerful. And we know, for example, that our president used to be on the board of South African breweries. There's so many links with alcohol industries. Heineken is sponsoring this. They're huge, big organizations that have budgets that are bigger than some small countries. And they persuade us. They spend them a lot of money persuading us that not only is alcohol essential to our well-being and to our social functioning, but almost that it's good for you.
So, Prof, South Africa has a culture where alcohol is part of our celebrations, braais, sporting events, and weekends. And binge drinking, unfortunately, is quite common. How does this pattern of drinking affect our health and cancer risk?
Well, the binge drinking is so harmful, and it's really what causes a lot of the other harms. And you'll remember all sorts of stories about what happens. People come home drunk, they beat their wives. So intimate partner violence is a huge issue. But more than that, statistically, inter-adult men against men violence is so much higher when people are drunk. Traffic accidents, for example. And then other aspects of health. We haven't even talked yet about liver cirrhosis or all the other things that happen to you when you drink excessively. So I think that I want to challenge that perception that it's so much part of our life. I think we have been bamboozled I think that's the word, into believing that because of the advertising campaigns. So if you look at any sporting it's soccer, rugby, cricket, there is alcohol advertising how wonderful we are and how you cannot celebrate us without alcohol. There is alcohol telling us that braais essentially have to have beer at braais, etc. And I think that we don't recognize how much advertising influences how we see ourselves and alcohol. And I wanted to talk about two things about that. The one is in Lithuania, which many people don't know where it is, but it's somewhere near Russia and Eastern Europe. In Lithuania, they've completely banned alcohol advertising everywhere. You're not allowed to. And they did a study which looked at what was the result of this. And they had a 35% decrease in young people being intoxicated. And they also were less likely to binge drink, and they were less likely to even start drinking alcohol. So I think it's about how we see the social norm, and we are so influenced by alcohol. On social media, for example, if you mention in any way alcohol, you're going to get bombarded with alcohol ads. But worse than that, you're not only going to get alcohol ads, you're going to be able to click on those ads and order directly to your home. So it's like this has been a complete shift of how incredibly clever marketing has been in order to get us to be drinking.
Just on it.
Second thing, I forgot the second thing. The second thing was about how the industry is targeting women. Because in South Africa, very few women drink relative to the number of men. And in fact, in Africa in general. And so for them, that's a very untapped market. And they target women in a lot of ways. You'll notice there's a lot of ads with sort of bold women coming and drinking and showing a lot of women drinking. They also target different kinds of drinks towards women. The brutal fruits and the sweeter things they think women would prefer to drink, ciders, etc. So I think we need to be aware of this. And in my view, one of the most important things would be to ban advertising.
You touched on a lot of points, Prof, that have made me really digest and think about. Like one being that violence, there's this link of alcohol to violence. And, I just realized it's true, as you say, that, when people drink and excessively drink, there's increase in intimate partner violence. And also, at the pubs or, the taverns, there's that violence men to men. Do you have any further, can you expand further on that? What is it about alcohol that fuels violence? Is it something in the alcohol that actually leads to violence versus, say, I know, like you say, people, if you drink in small amounts, it can help you relax. So what is it about that excessive drinking that results in that violence?
Yeah. It's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that really. I do know that it's associated with violence. I think part of it is that, alcohol is what they call a depressant. So although when we start drinking initially, you feel lifted and enlightened because it's starting to depress your inhibitions. But then eventually it depresses you and depresses you more. It can actually kill you if you drink too much. So I think it might just be, people they're not cognitively normal when they drink alcohol, if they've drunk too much. You can't make proper decisions. It's much harder to control your emotions. And then you also get inward gazing and start thinking about all your problems around what your issues are. And then you try and blame them on someone else, particularly your spouse, who is the person that's under your control very often. So I don't know, and I'm not an expert in this field, but I suspect that's more or less the mechanism that worked. Look, very often also there's a whole range of issues that cause intimate partner violence, but I think alcohol lubricates it, just enables it, rather than people in their right mind saying, okay, that's not the right thing to do.
100%. I agree with you, Prof, and thank you for that. So I want to ask you a question, Prof. So if you're sitting around a braai yourself and then someone said to you, Prof, surely 2 drinks can't hurt, let's have fun, let's loosen up, Prof, let's have some fun. What would you say to that, Prof?
Well, I think that it's true that there are a lot of people, and the degree of harm is less if you drink 1 drink or maybe 2 drinks. You're probably not going to die the next day. It's the long-term harm of cancer which you're risking, but a lot of people risk cancer related to a lot of things. I think I do think, though, I think we need to, I would say, try and examine, just think about why you think that drinking 2 drinks or 1 drink is okay. Why do we need to drink it all? And I think that then we need to help try in our everyday lives shift the social norm to saying, we can have alcohol-free places. We can have alcohol-free events. We can have places where I feel safe taking my children because I know there's no alcohol being present. So I think there's ways of engaging with it. But in general, I would really like to direct people's thinking towards policy because it's not really always an individual decision. So, for example, banning alcohol advertising is not an individual decision. But one of the issues is also availability. So if you go to some specifically township or even rural areas, you'll find that there are many more taverns and alcohol places than there are schools, for example. And shops even to buy stuff. So I think we need to be thinking in a sort of more broadly and think about how do we control the way that people drink. So there are lots of different ideas that are globally people have tried. In Sweden, you can't buy alcohol, for example, except at a state-sponsored shop. So the state sells all alcohol. It's not easy to get hold of. And I think that makes you think before you have a drink. It makes you think, okay, do I really want it? Do I really need it? I think though there's some of those aspects. I think also opening hours. In many cases you can get alcohol in South Africa 24/7. There's no closing. And it seems to me that the later hours of drinking seem to be the more dangerous. I know that there's been some research that has shown it. And then finally, just to think about during COVID, I don't know if people were aware, when there was an alcohol ban, the accident and emergency rooms in hospitals were empty. Now that was just hadn't been heard of before in South Africa. We just didn't ever experience that. And then suddenly when they banned alcohol, these rooms were empty, even on New Year's Eve. I mean, it was quite an incredible natural experiment, which just showed the extent of harm that alcohol can do.
It is actually quite, alarming because if we look at it further, I'm just thinking, Prof, they stopped, as far as I'm aware, you can't do any smoking advertising any longer. And now, we need to get to that point when something can cause such harm and there are so many, motor vehicle accidents, and that is massive. And exactly as you said, and we see it as well, is and it makes so much sense. Everyone was up in arms about the things like the alcohol, etc. But it makes sense because those rooms and those hospitals were needed for COVID and for COVID victims, not for people having motor vehicle accidents or getting angry and arguing and fighting and injuring each other. But one thing that actually stood out to me as well is, and I see this happening. And it's also a great concern because obviously this alcohol is seen to be, an acceptable drug, if you want to call it that. It's social. So we're often seeing it. I don't know if there is any statistics on things like high school children, which is quite alarming, how many of them get hold of this and how many seem to think it's acceptable and in their homes even, are exposed to it, but it's okay to have it. If we see an increase at all, or if we know in high school children and in younger people, are we seeing an increase in alcohol consumption?
I don't know the statistics offhand, and I don't know if we've seen an increase, but there's certainly, and there's some parents, for example, who believe that it's fine for their children to drink.
Yes.
I don't know how things happen like in Boyeni with the 21 children died, young people.
Yeah, right.
How were they there? How were their parents not aware that these, specifically the underage young people, were there? And I think it really is, parents do need to watch out what children are doing, not just illegal drugs, but legal. I've experienced in my own personal life, when my children were teenagers, I've experienced that they went to parties where the parents bought the alcohol in for the kids, which to me was quite shocking. But nevertheless, that's what sometimes happens. But yes, it's always seen as, if you're over 18, you can drink. If you're under 18, you can't. And therefore, the under 18s aspire to drink because that will make them older. They'll seem grown up. So it's a complicated area. But I think that also, again, it's about availability. So, if young people don't have it available, then they won't use it. One of the interesting things about young people is that they don't have a lot of money available because they're at school, they're not working. They may have some pocket money, but they don't have general money. And so they're very susceptible to increases in tax. So one of the weapons that WHO recommends is to increase tax on alcohol. And if you increase it high enough, it becomes not accessible. So there are a number of tools that people have developed to try and deal with these kinds of things. Another point is, of course, education and awareness amongst young people of the harm that alcohol can do, although many know it. They've experienced it themselves. Yeah.
And I think you're so right what you're saying. It really has to become policy, and we have to just reach out and continue educating, so that people become more and more aware of what this really means and what we are allowing into our bodies. But let's just say someone comes and they say, what can people actually do? So for someone listening today who enjoys, let's say, the occasional drink, what practical advice would you give to reduce their alcohol consumption enough to lower the cancer risk? And are there healthier choices people can start making today? We've got so many of these alcohol-free alternatives. Is this something we should be looking at? I mean, this is maybe a loaded question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. The alcohol-free alternatives are a good idea. You have to be careful, though, because some of them aren't actually alcohol-free. So I do know somebody, for example, who's allergic to alcohol and suffers because sometimes they've got alcohol in them. But there are good alternatives. One of the worries with them I have is that they use exactly the same branding as the alcohol content. So Heineken, whatever it is, if it's this no alcohol and this alcohol, it's the same branding. And they're using it to build brand loyalty. And that is a problem for me because they're trying to encourage you to buy their alcohol. But the other things that people can do, which are easy to do, for example, every drink that you have, you can have a soft drink afterwards in between. So you're not drinking one drink after the other, but you have delaying. Eat food while you're drinking or before even, because that helps you get less drunk and therefore you're not more susceptible to the harms. Support government policies. So when you go to your local councillor or if you're voting, find out what their alcohol policy is and if they're going to do anything about the harms that are happening to people in our communities. What else can we do? Just encourage, accept that there should be a ban on advertising. Yeah. And one of the things that we should be calling for, which SAPA is calling for, is to get the liquor amendment bill passed. There's a bill that's been in Parliament for 10 years that hasn't been passed. It addresses not all, but some of these issues. And we believe it's because the alcohol industry has interfered with the policy process. And that is very disturbing because it's not the will of the people. If you go out to any community, they will say, yes, please control alcohol, please. We're begging you. So I think those are some of the things that we can think about doing. And of course, then the standard things about eat healthily and exercise. Those are very good because they help you also not drink in excess.
Yeah, I think there's something we really need to bring out there is the alternatives and emphasize really looking at lifestyle, because you're right in what you're saying. The moment you're getting people exercising, more regularly, surrounding themselves by better food choices, they are the ones then take a step back and go, but I don't want to drink that much anymore because it's affecting my sport or whatever it is. So it kind of, the wheel can turn in so many different ways to make this person make better choices indirectly and not wait until something goes wrong for them to stop and take a second look at what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one thing that was fantastic once a couple of years ago was Ronaldo, the famous football player. They put a can of beer in front of him and he said, he pushed it away at an interview. He said, I don't want to advertise that stuff. So I thought that's really interesting.
Yes.
You really need people to champion it and to just think about the fact that it shouldn't be a norm.
I like the example of Ronaldo, Prof, where maybe we need influencers, positive influencers to help us, fight against alcohol. Because especially with the youth, they respond so much to celebrity and, influential people. So if maybe people like that can come on board and, support this, alcohol initiatives, that would be so helpful. And I'm also thinking with the youth, Prof, I have a Megan question, I often wonder because I see kids these days are getting into drugs and much earlier than you would think. And I think, do you think there's a link? Do you think like alcohol is also like a gateway drug of sorts for children or young people to try other harder substances?
It's a good question. I don't think so because it's legal. So although it's illegal for younger people to drink, it's not kind of it's not a very out there sort of thing to do is to drink. It's almost accepted, if you like. Other gateway drugs that people used to talk about were, for example, dagga, which was illegal then. And then because you're sort of starting on the edge of being illegal, you can move on. But I don't think there's a lot of evidence for that happening. Even with tobacco being a gateway, I don't think there's evidence for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Prof, this has been such an eye-opening conversation for us. And I mean, looking ahead, you've spent your career researching public health policy. If there was one change in society, in policy, or even in our own attitudes towards alcohol, that you believe would have the biggest impact on reducing the cancer risk in South Africa, what would that be, Prof?
Well, this can't really be one thing, but I do think that if government passed the Liquor Amendment Bill, if that were to be enforced and implemented, it would make a huge difference. And I think that would really say, ordinary people really feel that the government should be doing things in their best interest. And I know, for example, many years ago, I did a focus group discussion with some men, and they said to me, it was about tobacco then, and they said to me, well, if tobacco was so harmful to you, how would the government allow it to be sold? They just wouldn't. So in that kind of naive way of thinking, I think a lot of people need that indication that government and that the Department of Health, people all think this is not a good idea. This stuff is bad for you. And so that's that's the kind of level where I think also the control of alcohol through the Liquor Amendment Bill and implementing these, what they call the safer, the WHO safer, it's called a safer policy, would really work. Yeah.
And the one thing that comes to mind is looking at us also lobbying for change to be quicker, and I'm thinking of CANSA, standing together with organizations and lobbying and saying, this is how long we've known this information. This is scientifically based. And now we need to see it shift into policy because this is basically the way it needs to be upheld. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of people, basically pushing against us. But with what you've said here today, it makes so much sense that we need to start really controlling it better, limiting it, becoming aware of what it can potentially cause. And with that in mind, also the education to particularly the youth, I think from a school level already making them aware. And so they're they're drawn into this. And also the parents, and then of course the rest of us that are working, in work environments. I always see it's very, a lot of work environments where they have a social gathering and there'll be alcohol. Maybe it's time to say that the alcohol is not available at these types of gatherings. And, you can have the alcohol alternatives, like we've mentioned. And if there is going to be alcohol as well, that it would be that everyone could have one drink if they so wish, but that would be it. So it's just basically stopping that ball rolling, isn't it? Just like we did with smoking, saying, okay, into a policy. So with that in mind, I want to just hand over to Kudzai. Kudzai, anything else you would like to ask that's pertinent?
To be honest, that was a lot to digest. And Prof, I just want to thank you really for coming to join us on the CANSA Couch and helping us understand that we really don't know about alcohol. So our society doesn't really know the harms or the dangers of alcohol beyond what, the obvious, which obvious in quotation marks, the road accidents and all that. It's a group of, it's really harmful to our health, and no amount of alcohol is safe. So I'm really glad that you came to join us today and to teach us about all this information about alcohol that is really helpful for all of us. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof.
It was a pleasure, and I hope I've created a couple of alcohol activists.
That's one thing I'd like to say is that today's conversation has taught us anything, is that lowering the risk or the cancer risk isn't only about one big decision. It's actually about an everyday choice that we make. Now here we've started to understand the link between alcohol and cancer. I think, as you've already mentioned, many of us are aware. We know people have car accidents. We know that people lose their lives because of driving under the influence. Other people, innocent people, lose their lives. Then we get all types of violence, etc., that occur, and we get addiction. But now we can see that also with alcohol and cancer, it gives us the opportunity to make an informed decision, not only for ourselves, but also for our families going forward. And maybe we should start making these decisions in our homes and in our communities. And as we push it forward, it will hopefully then kick into a policy decision that will lead us to making better choices going forward. So thank you, Prof, and thank you to Kudzai. It's been really an honor today to hear more about this and put it in its rightful place. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye.